Our last two diseases that we're going to talk about with the cardiovascular system are Chagas disease and anthrax. First up, we have Chagas disease. Chagas disease has been characterized or called the new HIV/AIDS of the Americas because of the fact that it's spreading so rapidly and it's so difficult to treat and diagnose. Its long incubation period combined with difficulty of treatment makes it a rather scary disease. This disease is caused by the protozoa Trypanosoma cruzi. It's a flagellated protozoa, so it's a protozoan that has flagella on it. T. brucei is also a similar species of protozoa, and this one causes sleeping sickness in the African continent. If we look at the signs and symptoms of Chagas disease, they are going to be characterized by this protozoa multiplying in muscle cells. Blood cells are also going to rupture as this protozoa is multiplying, and large number of trypanosomes will be released into our bloodstream. The acute phase of this disease manifests itself with either mild to severe fever, so there could be a variable temperature increase, nausea, fatigue, and then a chagoma, which appears at the site of the bug bite, hence the name Chagas disease. The chronic phase of this disease is virtually asymptomatic. Eventually, those trypanosomes are going to be found throughout the body, and these trypanosomes will interact with the functions of heart, brain, and intestinal tract. So these protozoans will spread throughout our body systemically and cause a systemic infection and cause negative symptoms in a wide variety of body systems. To spread the protozoa, there is a particular insect known as the triatomines insect. Sometimes this is also referred to as the assassin bug. This insect can cause this protozoa can also be transmitted vertically, so it can cross the placental barrier and can be transmitted via blood transfusion as well. This is one of the reasons why individuals that have been traveling at risky countries or have lived in countries that have high incidences of this disease are not allowed to donate blood. Within the United States, there are approximately 8 million people that have been diagnosed with this disease. Of those 8 million people, 300,000 of them live in the United States. Most of these cases in the United States are going to be caused by travelers going to an endemic area or someone who's immigrated out of that endemic area. Unfortunately, there is no vaccine for Chagas disease. The fact that this disease is caused by a multicellular protozoa makes it a bit more difficult to come up with a vaccine for it. Pesticides and improved home building materials and building codes minimize the exposure to the insect, the arbor vector that transmits this disease, and minimizes the presence of that bug and the incidence of humans beginning or being inoculated with it. If treatment occurs early on, generally speaking, it will be successful. So if that treatment occurs early on in the acute phase of the disease. The only drugs that can treat this disease are available through the Center for Disease Control. So this is going to require a call to the CDC office. During the chronic phase, symptomatic treatment of cardiac and other problems is indicated. So once a patient enters the chronic phase and has left the acute phase, instead of focusing on curing the disease, the focus is on managing the symptoms. Here's the table summarizing the information on Chagas disease. It's caused by the protozoa Trypanosoma cruzi, and it's going to have primarily a arbor vector transmitting it. To treat that, we need to consult the CDC to receive the medication for it, and there are currently 300,000 cases in the United States. And then next, and not least, we have anthrax. Anthrax is a disease that can attack either the lungs or the skin. The pathogen is capable of multiplying very rapidly within the blood of an infected patient. Septicemic anthrax is the end game for all forms of anthrax. It's been known as centuries as a zoonotic disease, or a disease that can be harbored within livestock, particularly herbivorous livestock. A common nickname for this disease was sheep shearer's disease, because individuals that would spend a lot of time shearing sheep would oftentimes nick their fingers on the blades and then contract cutaneous anthrax as they were interacting with the sheep. Robert Koch used anthrax as a model for developing Koch's postulates back in 1877. So this is a very well-studied bacterium. And Louis Pasteur also used this disease to prove usefulness of vaccination. Depending on where the anthrax is causing infection, there are going to be different signs and symptoms. We have cutaneous anthrax, the skin. We have pulmonary anthrax in the lung. We can have gastrointestinal anthrax or anthrax of the meninges. Cutaneous and pulmonary forms of anthrax are the single most common forms. On all forms, this anthrax bacterium is able to gain access to the bloodstream. So the end game is septicemic anthrax. Death is typically going to be caused by an overwhelming case of septicemia that overwhelms the patient's body systems once that bacterium starts to rapidly reproduce within the patient's bloodstream. Pulmonary anthrax is going to be accompanied by pulmonary edema. As these lesions are forming within the lungs, there will be fluid buildup within the lungs. And hemorrhagic lung symptoms can sometimes initiate death. Occasionally, patients that contract pulmonary anthrax will drown in their own blood and bodily fluids. It's very difficult to separate the effects of septicemia from pulmonary infection because the bacterium can go so rapidly from the lungs through the respiratory membrane into the bloodstream. Septicemic anthrax typically is going to be associated with headache, fever, and malaise. Bleeding of the intestine and from other mucous membranes can occur late with after septicemic anthrax has been initiated. And those are some of the symptoms that are going to be used to distinguish septicemic anthrax from the other forms of anthrax. It's caused by Bacillus anthracis. Bacillus anthracis is a gram-positive endospore forming rod bacterium, and it's one of the largest bacterium and largest pathogens, single-cellular pathogens, I should say. So it's one of the largest single-cellular pathogens. These rods, or this bacterium, will have a length of up to 5 microns and a diameter of up to 1.2 microns. The spores that are capable of growing in this bacillus-shaped bacterium are going to allow for this bacterium to thrive and be maintained in almost all conditions of the host. The single most common source of anthrax is going to be the soil. There are dormant endospores from anthrax that are continually being dispersed into the soil, and from the soil being aerosolized and moved via dust. And once that endospore is aerosolized, it can make it into the water stream, or it can be inhaled by an animal, or it can land on a plant and then be consumed by an animal, initiating an infection. If we look at the Bacillus anthracis bacterium, it has a polypeptide capsule on it, and it's capable of secreting a tripartite toxin. This tripartite toxin is a protein complex that has 3 different exotoxins that work in conjunction with each other, hence the term tripartite. Once those 3 separate endotoxins conjugate with each other, the end result is going to be an action of exotoxin that causes massive inflammation and initiates toxic shock in the patients. Other virulence factors that this bacterium has include hemolysins. Hemolysins is an enzyme that specializes in removing iron from blood so that we can have more bacterial reproduction. And there's some other enzymes that are going to target host membranes to allow this bacterium to more rapidly spread and travel throughout the body of the host. This is a facultative parasite that is going to undergo a cycle of vegetative growth and sporulation within the soil. Animals typically are going to become infected while they're grazing on plants that have been contaminated with the spores. That pathogen can then be returned to the soil as the animal excretes out its excrement, or as the animal dies and its carcass is left to decompose in a field. Once in the soil, it will sporulate, becoming a long-term reservoir of infection. So the soil is the primary reservoir for the anthrax bacterium. Most natural anthrax cases are going to be reported within Africa and Asia and the Middle East, as it is transmitted from livestock to human beings. Within the United States, the most recent natural cases have been textile workers that have been working on either animal or hide products. It would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that in the United States, there were anthrax attacks following 9/11 in the year 2001. These attacks were aimed at 2 US senators and multiple postal workers. And during this attack, anthrax endospores were mailed in regular envelopes, and those individuals that were unfortunate enough to open up the envelopes received a high dose of these endospores. It's very difficult to control and count the number of species in the United States because there's very ineffective control measures. There are currently less than 10 cases in the United States on any given year, with the notable exception of the bioterrorism of 2001. I should also mention some additional safeguards that have been put in place since 2001 is now most mail that goes to a federal building is going to be irradiated with gamma radiation to destroy both the vegetative cell and the anthrax endospore. Generally speaking, the physician needs to be pretty suspicious or paranoid to diagnose anthrax. Anthrax is such a rare disease that most physicians are going to naturally just rule it out by laws of probabilities. It's so rare that it's difficult to keep it on the radar, and because it mimics other diseases that are not as rare, it's often going to be misdiagnosed as some other disease. The presumptive diagnosis should typically result in a culture being performed on blood agar and gram staining to help confirm the diagnosis. To finalize the confirmation, a sample needs to be handled by the Center for Disease Controls, and there are going to be direct fluorescence antibody testing and phage typing or immunoassay testing to get the confirmation of anthrax. If we are at risk of being exposed to anthrax, or if you're a human that is at risk of being exposed to anthrax, you should be vaccinated with the putrefied toxin for anthrax. So if you have lots of contact with livestock, or if you work with animal hides, animal bones, or if you are in the military, you are probably going to be vaccinated or have been vaccinated. The vaccine, though, is cumbersome. It requires 6 inoculations over an 18-month period. And because it's so cumbersome, there's a lot of active research going on right now to try to find a more manageable vaccine that maybe will only require 3 inoculations, which would be a dramatic improvement to the current 6 inoculations. If anyone has been exposed or is suspected of being exposed to this pathogen, they are typically going to be giving prophylactic antibiotics, or antibiotics before the symptoms develop. This has typically been found to be a way to effectively prevent the disease from manifesting itself even after exposure to the disease. Recommended antibiotics for anthrax or Bacillus anthracis include penicillin, doxycycline, and ciprofloxacin. This antibiotic treatment is typically going to be prophylactic, but occasionally can even worsen the symptoms. These are not gentle antibiotics. So there needs to be some discretion on the part of the healthcare provider team about when to prophylactically give the antibiotics and at what concentration to give those prophylactic antibiotics. Human cases, generally speaking, are going to need to require a consultation with the Center for Disease Control to help manage the symptoms and treatment of the patient. So, concept check class. Which forms of untreated anthrax cause the bacterium to enter the bloodstream and usually result in septicemia, followed by death? Is it cutaneous, pulmonary, gastrointestinal, meningeal, or all of the above? Go ahead and rewind the video, or flip back in your PowerPoints, or check your textbook to get me an answer. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The correct answer is E, all of the above. Regardless of how Bacillus anthracis gets into the body, ultimately it is going to enter the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream will result in septicemia and death of the patient. Here's a summary table showing most of the diseases, or excuse me, all of the diseases that we talked about during this chapter, and a couple that we didn't. If you have any questions about this material, please feel free to post them in the discussion board or shoot me an email. Happy studies.